Hello humans, I'm Paul Mount, and you are, as ever, very welcome to my world of stuff. Today I'm looking at a classic science fiction feature film, and I'm celebrating it because it's just been re-released, or issued rather, in a brand new, rather glitzy little Steelbook edition courtesy of Zavvi.co.uk. They're doing a series of science fiction classics as Steelbooks. And although I'm not a rabid physical media collection, I do like my physical media, and I do like certain collector's items, and it's nice to have physical stuff. It's nice to own a film rather than have access to it on a streaming service. Forbidden Planet then has been available on Blu-ray for some time. It's available on a cheaper edition online in certain other retailers. Other retailers are available, but this is a very nice steelbook edition. You can see it's a nice solid steel book, hence the name. Lovely evocative artwork, and opens up inside. It's got a poster of the original film poster, which I won't open up here, and it's got the disc and some very nice interior sleeve illustrations. So it's a very nice edition that's available now, and getting hold of it again, although I've already got it on a Region 1 box set I was gifted for Christmas a few years ago. I had a chance to have a look at it again yesterday. In terms of the disc itself, many of the special features have been available on previous editions. In fact, I think they're on the previous Blu-ray. So basically what you've got here is the Blu-ray that's already out in a nice box. So you've got the features, a couple of follow-up films starring Robbie the Robot, documentaries, excerpts from various bits and pieces. So it's a lovely little collection in itself. But of course we're here to watch and talk about the film. It's one of the classics of science fiction. I think it's the first point to make. 1956 film, directed by, I always have to look it up because I can never remember, Fred M. Wilcox. And it's based loosely, sort of, it has connections to Shakespeare's The Tempest. Not that I'm particularly familiar with all of the works of Shakespeare, but in terms of The Tempest, which is about a bunch of mariners stranded on an island on which dwells a strange old man and his daughter and a mysterious beast called Caliban. This evokes the spirit of that in its tale of a spaceship which is called the C-57D. The film itself is set in the 23rd century, and it tells the story of a spaceship crewed by sort of a military investigative unit who are travelling to a distant planet called Altair 4 to investigate the fate of an expedition that was sent there 20 years previously. When they get there, well, before they get there even, they get a radio message from a Dr. Morbius, who's played by Walter Pidgeon, who tries to keep them away from the planet, tells them they don't need any help, they're doing perfectly well, they don't need assistance. This obviously piques the interest and intrigue of the crew, who are led by Captain Adams, played by Leslie Nielsen, in a role light years away from his defining role as Frank Drebin in the Police Squad series of films and the TV series and all the comedy films he did towards the end of his career. Here he plays it straight, and it's if you're not used to seeing Leslie Nielsen playing straight, this is a bit of a shock to the system. But the Altair lands on the planet, and the planet is Altair. The spaceship lands on the planet, and it is very much the traditional sort of flying saucer circular design. It's very iconic. Lands on the planet. It's this sort of desolate, rocky terrain, and they're met by another science fiction icon, Robbie the Robot. Now, Robbie the Robot is one of the great science fiction creations. Often confused, and it happened to me many years ago, confused with the robot from Lost in Space, who's a very similar design, and the voice by Dick Tufeld, who provided the voice of Robbie, of the robot in Lost in Space, is very similar to the voice of Robbie in the film, which is provided by Marvin Miller. The voice tones are very similar. They both give the character a character. It makes it come across as a creature rather than a machine. Robbie takes them back to the living quarters of Dr. Morbius, who tries to assure them that all is well on the planet, although he hints that something terrible happened years ago and some of the other colonists met a terrible fate. It transpires that what's on the planet is the abandoned technology of an alien race called the Krell, which stretches hundreds of certainly miles down into the depths of the planet. And Professor Morbius, or Dr. Morbius, is intent on investigating this technology. He doesn't want to pass it back onto Earth because it's effectively millennia ahead of what the human race is capable of, and he doesn't really trust the human race with it, probably quite rightly. And he protects this the secrets of the Krell quite guardedly. But there's a machine there, sort of a brain machine, which can have debilitating effects on the consciousness, and it turns out it's had unfortunate effects on him. A strange creature appears to be attacking the spaceship, which is surrounded by an electrical perimeter fence, an invisible creature that starts attacking crew members, and again, the creature, the monster from the id, is one of the most iconic science fiction creations, even though we don't really see it until well over an hour into the film, and then we just see it as sort of a ferocious looking outline, red sort of video effect. Very, very impressive. And yeah, the sort of the twist of the film is that this isn't a monster that's native to the planet. It's been created, albeit subconsciously. I won't go into any more detail in case you haven't seen it, but I can't imagine there are too many sci-fi fans who haven't seen Forbidden Planet. It is an iconic film. It's a terrific film, even now, 70 years after it was made. And it's an important film because back in the 50s, when science fiction cinema boom began post-war, a lot of films were about the effects of nuclear detonations and nuclear technology. You had lots of films about insects being blown up to enormous proportions, such as Tarantula and Them, and then the potential effects of radiation on human beings and things like The Incredible Shrinking Man. So science fiction was quite insular in looking at how mankind could be affected by technological advance. So of course we get that sort of thing these days in shows like Black Mirror, because they're enduring themes in the genre. But Forbidden Planet was one of the first films that took us out into space and suggested that man might have a future out in the stars, investigating other worlds and other galaxies. And it's very much a template for Star Trek, the idea of this spaceship voyaging out across the galaxy, investigating alien civilizations and alien worlds. It is very much that format, and you do wonder if, I'm sure Gene Roddenberry was inspired by this film, because it's very much that template of the crew. It's way ahead of its time visually. The visual effects are just astonishing even now. If you think of the digital effects that they have today, the CGI options, that you literally can create anything that you can imagine. Back in the 50s, they didn't have that. It was all done with matte painting, glass paintings, what might be today considered primitive video or digital effects, but it looks really very good. It doesn't let the side down at all. There's not one scene, I think, in this that visually where you go, not sure about that. It's very convincing. It's a totally convincing world, a totally convincing story. One of the things that does make it particularly convincing and helps create this feeling of an alien world and an alien atmosphere is the incredible incidental music created by B.B. and Louis Barron, which is described in the credits as electronic tonalities. It's a very early sort of synthesizer electronic music that was created by an instrument called a theremin. Now you may have seen this demonstrated on various TV magazine and chat shows. It's this extraordinary device whereby you run your hands over and above it, and the movement of your hands creates the effects, the sounds. It's all very electronic sounding, and the soundtrack of Forbidden Planet, which you'll have heard a little bit of in the credits, is discordant, disquieting, eerie, sort of not exactly tuneless, but it's very evocative of what it must have been like in the 50s to imagine the otherworldliness of travelling in space. It's a remarkable achievement, and again it set the tone for the way that music scores will be composed in science fiction films decades afterwards. It's, in that way, it is way ahead of its time in so many ways. Where it isn't ahead of its time, or where it hasn't aged very well, is the sequences surrounding Anne Francis's character Altair. She's the daughter of Dr. Morbius, and she's never seen any other human being. She was born on the planet, she's grown up on the planet, she's only ever known the flora and fauna of the planet. Now inevitably you've got a spaceship full of, I think it's 18 healthy young men in their 20s who've been travelling in space for over a year to get to Altair, who haven't seen a woman, and this leads to lots of unfortunate, what is this thing called, kissing type sequences, where various members of the crew take a fancy to her and make what might be considered today improper advances on an innocent young woman. Now I'm not one of those people who throws my hands up in despair and demands that things from the past should be cancelled and ignored and erased because they don't fit modern sensibilities. I'm quite capable of compartmentalising things and saying, well no, this was made in the 50s, this was made in the 70s, attitudes have changed, you wouldn't make it this way today, but it was made then. It doesn't register it, or doesn't mean that it's something you have to ignore or disparage. It's a work of art made of its time. I think we have to try and remember that, rather than shout and rant and scream and demand that things are wiped out of history. I think it's important to learn from the past. but that's probably not for this particular channel. But no, those sequences with Altair are a little bit cringy, not just because they are not what we'd expect today, but because they actually do slow the action down, and they add a sort of an element of cheesiness to what is quite an adult, hard science fiction film. The concepts that are presented in the film are quite raw and quite tough and quite intellectual, and to have all this stuff about kissing and grappling and groping, it just takes you away a little bit from the core thrust and theme of the film. Also, slightly out of place are one or two comedic scenes involving Robbie the Robot. So, as I said, Robbie's a fantastic creation and he's incredibly iconic in the world of science fiction. But there are a couple of scenes where he's played for humour, particularly in the scenes involving the cook of the ship, played by Earl Holliman, who just wants him to recreate a stash of bourbon that he can take back with him. And there's a couple of scenes that sort of comedic scenes. They're not over the top, but again, they do jar a little bit from the tone of the film as we've had it so far. But they're minor quibbles, really. I think whether you watch any old film, anything from classic cinema, classic TV, you have to make allowances for the fact that stories are told in different ways and attitudes are different. And I think it's important that we recognise that rather than just rant and demand that things are banned, because that's counterproductive in many ways. But anyway, that's Forbidden Planet. It is a terrific film. This new Steelbook edition is a beautiful thing. Zavvi are bringing out a series of other films, including Logan's Run and Steven Spielberg's AI, come out shortly, and I'll probably get hold of those. It's very much recommended. It looks fantastic on Blu-ray, obviously. It's a beautiful transfer. And more importantly, Forbidden Planet is an important film. And I think any science fiction fan will need to have it in their collection. And most of you would have seen it. I remember seeing it back in the 70s, in the glory days when the BBC used to run science fiction film series. But those days are gone, unfortunately. But this is one you need to see. It's an important touchstone in science fiction, and was the jumping off point for so many other science fiction films and stories. I mean, it particularly inspired a 1975 Doctor Who serial called The Planet of Evil, in which the Doctor and Sarah, his companion at the time, landed on a planet at the edge of creation, where a group of humanoid explorers were trapped on the planet because they were trying to take away some antimatter, and there was a creature on the planet which was made of antimatter, and it's very much that sort of monster from the id type thing, because it attacks the spaceship and kills people and sucks the life out of them. And that was the period when Doctor Who was riffing off classic science fiction and gothic horror. And it's quite clear the sort of Forbidden Planet origins of that particular story. So it's had an impact on, probably all sorts of things like Alien and various other, anything to do with sort of strange monsters and creatures. You can trace it back to Forbidden Planet in a way. And as I say, particularly Star Trek, which is very much the template for. Anyway, that's Forbidden Planet. If you don't want to pick up the Steelbook edition, it's available quite cheaply on Blu-ray in a normal, straightforward edition with all the same special features. But if you're a fan of the genre, it's one you need to have because it's a classic. Anyway, thank you for watching. Hope you've enjoyed this little vid, and I will see you soon for some more stuff.